Hello, welcome to this slide pack of the Petroleum Operations Manager Certification Training. Today, we shall be looking at the petroleum fiscal systems. Fiscal systems are the government's most important tool for managing petroleum resources in every country, and these arrangements determine the net debt of contractors, that is the oil and gas companies, and the government. Therefore, it is our wish that this course will help managers, technical as well as administrative personnel in the government and industries understand how fiscal arrangements work and be better equipped when negotiating contracts. What is a petroleum fiscal system? It consists of three things: the legislative system, the taxation system, and the contractual system. We have more fiscal systems in the world than there are countries due to different negotiation terms and numerous vintages. So one oil and gas company may have different contracts with the state with having completely different fiscal systems. So that is why we might end up having a lot more fiscal systems in the world than there are number of countries. Important in understanding what a petroleum fiscal system is the notion of economic rent. The economic rent helps shows the impact fiscal arrangements have on both government and the contractors from oil and gas resources. Economic rent can simply be regarded as the produce of the earth derived from labor and capital. This produce is divided between the laborers for their wages, the owners of capital, that is oil and gas companies, for the profits, and owners of land, that is host government, for their rents. So economic rent could simply be regarded as the value derived from the use of natural resources less the cost of extracting these natural resources. So this table simply shows how we get the economic rent. So we have the cost incurred by the oil and gas companies, and then we have the profit made by oil and gas company, which on that chart is referred to as the contractor take. So the cost incurred by oil and gas company, which is the operating cost, development cost, and exploration cost, plus their share of profit, forms the total cost for the government. Therefore, economic rent will be the gross revenue less total cost incurred by the government. Now, total cost incurred by the government will be all spent by the contractor, which is simply what we call the contractor's entitlement. So economic rent is simply noticed in the following. So it is paid to the government as bonuses, as royalties, as production sharing, as taxes, and also as government participation. We mentioned earlier that a petroleum fiscal system consists of the legislation, the taxation system, and the contractual system. So what is therefore a taxation system? In the petroleum industry, we have petroleum taxes taking the features of both a regressive and a progressive tax structure. Regressive in that some petroleum taxes are non-profit based, for example, exploration permits, signature bonuses, and so on. While on the other hand, The progressive taxes are those that are based on the level of profit realized by the oil and gas company. This could be the income tax, which is usually calculated as a percentage of profit. So the chart shows the different taxes that are applicable at the different stages in the life cycle of an oil and gas field. So before cost recovery, that is before commercial production begins, the oil and gas companies still pay rents to the state in the form of taxes, which will include like the application fee, the signature bonuses paid to the state, the discovery bonuses, the production bonuses, as well as production sharing. Now, when they start making money from the oil operations, they pay progressive form of taxes, which will include income tax, special petroleum taxes, as well as repatriation taxes. This chart is simply trying to compare what the oil and gas company takes home relative to its investment in different countries. So, for example, a 25 million barrel oil field in Ireland gives the same profit after tax for an oil company as a 144 million barrel field in Indonesia. So, by the same argument, we can say that a 46 million barrel oil field in China gives the same profit after tax as a 117 million barrel field in Cameroon. We now move over to the contractual system of the Petroleum Fiscal system. So we mentioned that we have more fiscal systems in the world than there are number of countries, but we can group these into two families. We have the concessionary contracts and the contractual system. In the concessionary system, oil and gas companies are allowed to own mineral resources, but in the contractual system, the state retains ownership to oil and gas resources. The contractual system can also be further divided into the service agreement and production sharing contracts. We shall look at each of these in return and understand what they mean for us. In a typical concessionary system, the oil company have exclusive right to explore, to produce at its own risk. So they have their own operational program that is not controlled by the state. So they decide when to produce, how to produce, and when to sell it. So they own production. The oil company often pays royalties and surface rental to the government as a form of rent, and then they pay also the income tax on the profit they made. So they own their oil and gas equipment, and they have the right to export their hydrocarbons. On the other hand, in a production sharing contract, title never passes to the oil and gas company, so this is retained by the state. The contractor only gets a share of production as compensation, and this is usually done in kind. The contractor shares risks with the government as well, even though they do not own title to oil and gas resources. In a service contract, we've seen service contract being divided into two different types. So we have pure services and then we have rig services. In a rig service contract, the contractor shares the risks with the government. The contractor gets as compensation a share of profits. In this case, it is not oil, but it is money. The contractor never holds title to oil and gas resources. In a pure service contract, the oil and gas company doesn't take any risks. So we can simply look at it as a form of joint venture with the state, where they may provide financing for the oil field operations, or they provide technical expertise that most governments do not have. In recent time, the production sharing contract is what we find most countries negotiating with oil and gas companies. So we shall spend a little time to get into some details to look at how a production sharing contract works. First of all, what are the elements of a PSC? One, you have work commitment. Two, you have bonus payment. Three, you have royalties. Four, you have cost recovery. Five, you have profit oil. Six, you have government participation. Seven, you have domestic market obligations. Eight, you have ring fencing. Now, let's look at each of these elements and see how they impact our operations. Work commitment. In a typical PLC, you often find some clauses stating the minimum level of work that is expected of the oil and gas companies. This may be at the level of the acquisition of seismic data, that is during the exploration phase of the oil field. So the government may say, hey, you need to do this minimum number of shooting, and this is where, and this is the time we need to do the shooting. During production or development, the government might also say, hey, this year we want you to drill 50 wells. Next year you only drill 5 wells, and you must employ this number of persons in your oil operation. So there are kind of obligations that are usually work obligations that are usually given to the oil and gas company. Bonus payment. A typical PSC will witness 3 forms of bonuses paid. So you have the signature bonus that is often paid when the oil and gas company signs its PSC with the state, and you have a clause in that contract that usually stipulates that, okay, when the oil and gas company discovers oil, they'll have to pay what we call a discovery bonus to the state. All of these are simply forms of economic rent. And then you may also have a clause for production bonus, where they will say the oil and gas company will pay a certain bonus, or a certain quantity of production will be given to the state as production bonus, and this happens when production reaches some specified levels. Bonuses make a fiscal regime regressive and are unpopular with oil and gas companies. Royalties. This is also another form of economic rent, or form of taxes that the government get from the oil and gas companies. Royalty is simply calculated from gross revenue, and in most cases it ranges from 0 to 20%. Now, in some cases, royalty can cause premature abandonment of an oil field if the basis of determining this royalty are not properly taken into consideration. Cost recovery. In a PSC, the oil and gas invest and they don't get anything in return. They are only compensated when the oil field start producing. In most PSCs, they will say, okay, the oil and gas company, you've invested X amount into this oil and gas operation, but you cannot pull out this amount of money at the same time. You'll be pulling it out gradually. And what the government use in determining what amount of investment that the oil and gas company can recover over time is what we call the cost oil or cost recovery. So cost oil usually has an upper limit. In most cases, it's about 60%. Cost oil normally includes unrecovered costs carried over from previous years, operating costs, expense, capital costs, current year DD&A, that's depreciation, depletion, and amortization, interest and financing, investment credit, which is an uplift, abandonment cost recovery fund. Profit oil is the direct opposite of cost oil. Why cost oil is used by government to determine how the oil and gas companies recover their investment. Profit oil, on the other hand, is meant to compensate these oil and gas companies. See, you've invested in this oil field, and we say, okay, this year, this is how much you can take back home to your country. So profit oil can be regarded as the net revenue less cost oil or cost recovery. So net revenue is gross revenue less any royalties. Profit oil is analog to taxation in a concessionary system and service fee in a service agreement. Profit oil is split between government and contractor, and profit oil is usually, but not always, taxed. Government participation. Though most often you will not find government taking part in investing in oil and gas operations in a typical PSC, you often find government trying to take part in profit sharing. So you have the cost oil that is given to the oil and gas companies to recover their investment, and then you have the profit oil that is given to them to compensate them for their investment. Now, in this profit oil, most often you will find government trying to participate in the sharing of this profit oil. So the government will say, okay, you have a profit oil of 40%, but I'm not going to let you take home all that 40% of production. Give me 10%, give me 15%. That is what we mean by government participation in a production sharing contract. Now, the level of participation by the government depends on what is called the R factor. An R factor is simply an index to measure the profitability of a production sharing contract and the extent cost has been recovered. So there are different ways you can measure the R factor. This is always stated in the production sharing contract. So one of the methods include using a ratio of cumulative revenue on cumulative cost, cumulative revenue less ratio of cumulative OPEX on cumulative CAPEX, and so on. Domestic market obligations. Most PSC will state some market obligations that the oil and gas companies may have to respect. An example may just be obliging the oil and gas companies to sell a certain volume of oil to the government at some discounted prices. Also common in the PSC is ring fencing. What is ring fencing? Ring fencing occurs when a portion of the company's assets or profits are financially separated without necessarily being operated as a separate entity. So there are three main reasons why you often see a production sharing contract including a clause for ring fencing. One of them could be for regulatory reasons, another could be creating asset protection schemes with respect to financing arrangements, and the last one is segregating into separate income streams for taxation purposes to avoid netting of tax incomes. This case study is meant for us to refresh our understanding on what a production sharing contract is all about and how production is often shared between the contractors and the host government. Suppose our oil company has a working interest of 75% in a production sharing contract where 40% of production is used to recover its investment and 60% is profit oil. Suppose also that the host government participates in profit sharing with an R factor of 1.5, permitting her to take 45% of profit oil. Calculate our oil company's entitled production if the oil produced in this field is 10,000 barrels. The total production in the field stands at 10,000 barrels, hence cost oil, which is 40%, will be 4,000 barrels, and profit oil, which is 60%, will be 6,000 barrels. So our share of cost oil will be 75%, which is our working interest, times the available cost oil, which is 4,000 barrels. So that gives us 3,000 barrels. To get our share of profit oil or compensation oil, we need to remove the state share and then share the balance to the operators according to their working interest. So total profit oil is 6,000 barrels and the state share of profit oil based on its R factor is 45%. So this gives the state a total of 2,700 barrels of oil. So we are left with a quantity of 3,300 barrels of profit oil available for the oil and gas contractors. So since we have a working interest of 75%, our share of this will be 75% of that balance, so which will give us 2,475 barrels. Therefore, our oil company gets a total production of 5,475 barrels of oil. Thank you and hope you enjoyed this course.